a big part of just reckoning with being human is we have to know how to see change and live change, accept change for what it is. And I begin with goodbyes are a very important part of how we learned to mark and accept and lean into the reality of change. Hi, I'm John Cutterback.
And I'm Sofia Cutterback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
And raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship.
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live,
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome, everybody. Goodbyes and good homes. Great to be here with my wife. I always enjoy these conversations we have. And as usual, we're ready to jump into a seasonal one, although one with um, all-encompassing significance at any time of the year, but certain time of the year you particularly think about goodbyes.
Yeah, good. I'm excited to talk about it.
And now, for me, this is graduation time of year. So, one thing that you've said about me through the years, and I come back to this a lot, my life as an academic, as a professor, is particularly characterized by being a permanent fixture in a transient community.
Yeah.
And that is always is brought home annually at graduation. And so I've had a lot of occasion to say goodbyes, experience them, suffer them, do good ones, do bad ones. And it frankly also is connected to some experiences in my own life, my own family,
Mhm.
family of origin. I mean, how people do goodbyes is a serious matter.
Mhm.
It's a very big part of human life. And so for me, framing this conversation as goodbyes and good homes is to try to narrow in on learning how to say goodbye is key to living in relationships, to living a truly human life. And as usual, the home is the kind of primordial place of learning how to do that. And
Mhm.
it's going to prepare us for goodbyes that come outside the home. But we can, I think we should talk about certain kinds of goodbyes, some of which can be downright traumatic and permanent,
Mhm.
permanent in some sense
Yeah.
and not permanent in another,
Mhm.
um, take place in the home. So it encompasses a lot of different things, from the goodbye that maybe dad says in the morning when he's going off to work, to even good night is a kind of goodbye, to
Sure. Yeah.
one of us is going on a business trip, a child moving away from home,
Yeah.
and on and on.
Yeah. 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 I guess it's interesting because it kind of brings up the question, what is a good goodbye?
Right.
Because there's such a thing as a bad goodbye. And actually, we've even seen people do a no goodbye. The other thing you had said that you've had a lot of experience saying goodbyes. Another thing is that you've actually had a lot of experience watching other people say goodbye. And it's really a fascinating thing. We're kind of in an unusual situation where we see a large number of people all having to say goodbye at the same time. So it is kind of interesting that you just really kind of have a cross section of different ways that people say goodbye, um, maybe different reasons that people say goodbye in different ways. And so
Yes.
it's really given us
Right.
a lot of opportunity to kind of look at this and even ask ourselves the question, does it matter how people say goodbye to one another? Is it something that's purely personal? Is there something that we should be striving toward and shaping our goodbyes? Is it worth shaping the goodbye to be a particular kind of thing? And if it is,
Exactly.
what principles
Exactly.
do we use
Exactly.
to kind of think about that? So,
And I'd like to suggest, just as our podcast is the Intentional Household podcast, we need to be intentional about a lot of things.
mhm,
And I think goodbyes are something we should be intentional about, starting with ourselves and then forming others if we're raising children, grandchildren, others in our life that we're forming in any way, helping them. There's an art of saying goodbye.
sure. Yeah.
It can and should be done well. And in my mind, a key starting point here is um, to bring up a famous line that C.S. Lewis said, as reported by Sheldon Van Auken, when they were saying, right, it's very touching. I've written a piece on this before, and I have no interest here in quibbling with C.S. Lewis, but I want to bring this up. The story was that they were well, saying goodbye, but at the end of a lunch in Oxford, and Lewis said something to the effect of, "I'm not going to say goodbye because I'm going to see you again." And then from across, they parted, and then from across the street, he called back, "Besides, Christians never say goodbye."
Mhm.
There's something very touching. There's something very beautiful, and there's a wonderful insight
Yeah.
about that. In any case, there's no permanent goodbye.
Mhm.
And that's fair. That goes to very root convictions in our life. But if I may be practical in this way, well, with due appreciation for the beauty of that, my immediate concern is that on hearing that, people can think, okay, great, Christians don't say goodbye, so I don't really have to worry about the art of saying a good goodbye. And particularly given that very often it is something that we don't really want to do.
Yeah, it's a very
It's
hard
it's
thing.
hard to do.
Yeah.
So and this can also lead to, the phenomenon of what people call the Irish goodbye. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's fair to the Irish. So I'm just gonna would that which I have heard called that, is there a place maybe sometime for slipping out and not, I mean, right, that's colloquially, that's how I hear it used. An
Mhm.
Irish goodbye is when someone kind of vanishes without actually having said goodbye. Is there a place for that? Perhaps sometimes, rarely, but in my mind, do. Let's get in the zone of the appropriate goodbye is a gift. It's a gift that we give to those that we say it to, that we share with, and it's a gift to ourselves too.
Mhm. Well, can you explain a little bit? I mean, saying it's a gift, kind of sparks kind of interest or curiosity. And of course, because it's a gift, it's kind of excitement about, ooh, tell me more about how it's a gift. But kind of getting very practical. It's not very obvious when you say it's a gift. Can you kind of unpack that a little
Alright,
bit?
good. Well, then before we get we are gonna get very practical, but to get practical, we have to get philosophical.
All
We're
right.
gonna go into a quick
Yep.
quick
It
quick
wouldn't be a
quick
conversation
principle
with you
here.
if we weren't
Well,
doing that.
let me try. Saint Augustine says in the Confessions that in life, change is like a series of little deaths.
Hmm.
He was a very sensitive soul, and this is very
Mhm.
beautiful. It's so, it touches something deep in me. Again, particularly being a permanent fixture in a transient community. I don't like change. Frankly, in certain ways, it gets harder for me every year, which is
Mhm.
hard to think about what's gonna be like in another 20 years. But, um, the death is obviously something that's very hard for us. That Augustine calls change a kind of little death, is pointing to an intrinsically uh, difficult aspect of human life, is how things um, keep passing away. We keep
Mhm.
losing things, even
Mhm.
if it's something as simple as that stage in our child's life,
Mhm.
that stage in our life,
Yeah.
this particular strength that we had that now has been taken away for us, or this particular time with this person or these people in this community or in this beautiful village. That we life in many ways is an ongoing exercise in detachment, of having
Mhm.
to be separated or give things up, and part of our natural desire for for heaven ultimately is a desire to get beyond change. Right, our ultimate happiness needs to be something Aristotle saw. This needs to be something secure. We want to
Mhm.
get at least as much as humanly possible beyond change, and of course, that's the wonderful thing, is Christianity promises that. So we need to begin by recognizing this is a big part of just reckoning with being human, is we have to know how to see change and live change, accept change for what it is. And I begin with goodbyes are a very important part of how we learned to mark and accept and lean into the reality of change.
Wow, that's actually a really beautiful way of putting that, that it's a way of marking and accepting the reality of change. That's I've never really thought of it that way, that it's kind of bearing witness to something instead of struggling against something that is inevitable or impossible for us to actually control.
Mm. So I don't know if I'd thought of it that way. either, but and even in your saying it back to me strikes me again. I think very often that's why we don't want to say the goodbye, because to say the goodbye is to just kind of like open up your heart and
Yeah.
minds and soul to the reality of, hey, we need to say goodbye. You can almost, I've seen this so often. I've done it. You're kind of scurrying around, making the final preparations,
Mhm.
almost hoping that somehow the separation is going to come without having to stop and look into a person's eyes.
Mhm.
And this is where we need to say goodbye. You almost want
Mhm.
it to just pass,
Right.
but saying the
It's
goodbye
marking the moment.
is embracing the reality in its difficulty, but hopefully in such a way that also recognizes, though it's hard, there's always something to be grateful for. There's something we need to receive here. And,
Mhm.
and a good goodbye is going to help us do that in a very important way.
Do you think that part of what's required in order to be able to fully accept and affirm, so to speak, the nature of change, that change is a little death, do you think that it requires a worldview that includes eternity? Is 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 it only possible for can is this something that someone who doesn't believe in an afterlife can peacefully accept? Or does it require a kind of promise for an afterlife that offers us something without change?
I,
What do
I
you
love,
think?
well, I love that question because regardless of exactly how we answer it right now, and that's a hard question, it shows immediately the intrinsic connection of goodbyes to ultimate things. There's always echoes of bigger things in every little goodbye, if I may. That, and maybe I'm thinking of, so when Lewis calls back, he must have had a smile on his face. Besides, Christians never say goodbye. I mean, I mean, there's this beautiful aspect of he's leaning into the fundamental reality of we're made to live together, and we're made to live together in a stable, beautiful place
Mhm.
where every tear shall be wiped away, and will be no more goodbyes. So and again, that's what he's focusing on there. But I just come back and say, well, but at the same time, the well done goodbye is precisely a way of affirming that, but recognizing the truth that we are not there yet, and part of getting to the land where there's no goodbyes is living well in the land where there are
Mm.
goodbyes, and realizing we must be willing to endure these separations. I mean, it's just so real. You find yourself thinking, why does my child have to move away? Why does this student have to graduate? Why can't we keep going to the same school together, whether
Mhm.
childhood friends? You know, and even in a sense, spouses parting in the morning. Why can't we just spend the day together? But no, somehow what we are called to do, to grow into our true selves, we have to pass through the veil of tears in order to form our souls in such a way that we'll be ready for the land with no change. So,
Mhm.
but I didn't directly answer your question. Aristotle doesn't know of a place where we'll be where there's no change.
Mm.
But would he have been well aware? I mean that's where you can kind of have this pagan poignancy of, they feel the desire to get beyond change, but they don't naturally see any immediate way that you'd be able to do that. And
Mhm.
so often, a one noble way that they respond to that is they just approximate it the best that they can. The best that
Mhm.
we can do is have true friendship, be true to your friends, live in virtue. Virtue is stable. These are the kind of things that Aristotle emphasizes, for instance, about true friendship. In a sense, life is about friendship. Friendship is the most stable reality,
Mhm.
really, in naturally speaking, in human life, because of the kind of character of the people involved, the way they can trust one another. They know they still have one of those hearts, even if they're not in the same place.
Mhm.
And all these things can be, in fact, be brought out beautifully by certain goodbyes. So you got
Mhm.
that kind of thing going on beautifully in Aristotle.
Yeah, even while you're speaking, it strikes me almost that I wonder if, I'm kind of thinking about the, again, as you said, I don't know if it's an unfortunate category, if it's accurate, but the Irish goodbye of just slipping away without saying goodbye. At first blush, it seems that that is just saying, we're just not going to mark or note that this horribly painful thing is happening. We're going to make it easier for everybody by just passing over it. But in a certain sense, that's precisely the thing that makes it actually be experienced like a real death. That if you actually say goodbye, on the one hand, it's accepting that the change is happening, which whether you accept it or not, it's going to happen, right? But it's also a marking, not just of the change, but that something is being changed from. And so maybe a really important way, like for someone like Aristotle, that a goodbye is actually a way of enduring with a kind of a permanence, because by saying goodbye, it's our words, it's our intention. What we're acknowledging is something has happened that is now concluding that makes me sad, but I'm marking its reality by acknowledging it with this formal acknowledgement. And
Right.
so, in a certain sense, it's kind of like it keeps it in memory.
Yeah,
It,
good.
it
Good,
marks
good,
it
good.
as a real
I agree.
experience that's
I agree.
worthwhile to hold on to, at least in memory, and its passing is marked officially.
Amen. Amen. So thoughts are coming into my mind. I want to talk about different kinds of goodbyes and we will get very practical. I mean, already now, just think of different things. If we're thinking in these terms, how we can do better than we already are right now. Certain things like even good nights, good morning. Well, no, good morning is not goodbye. Good nights. The goodbye in the
In the morning,
morning
sure.
when you're separating for even just
School,
the day. Again,
work. Yeah.
everything has to be done in an appropriate way. It's not going to be hyper dramatic. You can't bear to be away for a few
Hmm.
hours. I mean, that'd be silly. But then marking these things, it's a way I think again done well because it could be done in fear. I have to admit. I part of my own struggle with goodbyes is I know I have certain fears. I don't have to go into exactly how and exactly why, but that I have to reckon with of a fear of separation. And frankly, a good goodbye to me is partially how I remind myself that everything's going to be fine, even though we're not going to be together right now. In a sense, we are still together and you had already kind of adverted to that earlier. And to one extent, it's a way of almost overcoming the change by
Hmm.
marking it in memory. And also, I want to make a suggestion. I always say this to my students, and I love it. I try to practice it. Of three things that a good goodbye doesn't have to necessarily have all three, but a good goodbye is an opportunity for all three of these things. And let me just say what they are now.
Hmm.
We can talk to them. APT, apt, apology, praise, and thanks. A good goodbye is a good opportunity to say an apology when appropriate, to offer praise when appropriate, and to offer thanks, which is almost always appropriate.
Hmm.
And I think the goodbye is naturally suited to be one of those special opportunities for things that we'll do each of those things at other times when we're not saying goodbye,
Hmm.
but that it is a time, and so I just put it to you now. I say to my students getting ready, the seniors, I say, as you're getting ready to say goodbye to one another, I want you to think about particularly looking back over your time, first a little examination of conscience. Is there something that you really never apologized for that you want to apologize for? This is a great opportunity to do it. Is there something that you wanna honor the person for? This is and say, "I've always appreciated how you such and such. I've always appreciated this," or how, looked up to you, or I remember particularly that time that you such and such. Or goodbye is a wonderful time to offer kind of praise and honor in
Hmm.
that way. And then at this moment of saying goodbye, even if I have thanked you before for certain things, it's a great time to thank you again
Mm.
because it's just a natural moment to go back to these root convictions we have as a way of entering into marking and dealing with
Mhm.
processing the pain of being separated.
Mhm.
But I think already we can come back to those three things if you want, but already just if you think about those, each of those, it 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 enriches what has happened in the past
Mhm.
and it in a way brings it in an enriched way into the present
Mhm.
and even the future. For you carry with you that apology. You carry with if you're on the receiving end the praise. You carry with you the thanks, or even it's a great joy you carry with you that you have rendered these things
Mhm.
to another. It enriches your relationship, and this now stands between us, in the good sense of standing between us, as part of what we have had, in such a way that what we've had is ready to endure with us. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it totally does, and it makes sense. I could see how very much psychologically and emotionally that if we don't mark those things, what are we taking with us in our memory in the future? Not that we would necessarily forget everything if we didn't say that, but it's kind of random memories. Whereas if you can kind of focus and streamline those memories by apology, praise, and thanks, then it's almost kind of like you've officially marked those things, and now you have actually something
Mhm.
very specific that you move forward into the future with.
Yes. No, I like that way of putting it.
I actually, while you were describing that, that was a very practical example of, in the context of, for example, a college graduation, how seniors maybe would take leave of one another. Obviously, that could be the case with professors and students and, other mentors and things like that. And of course, you could see that exactly that type of formulation that you're talking about right there would be something that would happen if a child is leaving home for the first time or
Mhm.
graduated from college, now getting a job somewhere else and leaving the home. But I was thinking about those smaller goodbyes. How does thinking about these big goodbyes tell us something more about the small goodbyes that happen on a regular
Mhm.
basis within the
Mhm.
home? And it just was striking me that APT is kind of a good structure, even for the small goodbyes. Not that as you're leaving for work, you stand there and say, okay, I just want to apologize to you that I left my socks out yesterday when you didn't want. No, 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 I'm not talking about that. But if you can remember that principle, that overarching principle of the spirit of how we say goodbye, apology, praise, and thanksgiving, then in a certain sense, you can, in a very small way, as you look at your spouse or your child and you're saying goodbye, have a spirit of almost kind of the um, vulnerability of the apology, of saying, I know that I'm not self sufficient to myself. And I know there have been times that I haven't made it easy for us to be together. This is not making a formal apology. It's just interiorly remembering that we have this
Mhm.
kind of relationship of
Mhm.
vulnerability that we're going to have to say I'm sorry to one another for all kinds of things because of that vulnerability. So it's kind of maybe
Yeah.
recollecting a vulnerability that's there in the relationship. And then also praise, that just momentary, just looking at your spouse or your child with, you've done this amazing thing. So it's a kind of an appreciation. And then Thanksgiving, I'm so grateful for. I mean, this can be just like an absolute momentary flash, but if we strive to be a little bit more conscious of those moments when we say goodbye, not that we're necessarily saying any kind of big speeches or anything long or anything like that, but that when you turn to kiss your spouse as you're leaving, you put yourself into a stance that's something other than like, see you later, but thank you. I'm grateful.
Yeah,
I
I
can't
like
wait to
that.
see you again.
Right. So it almost seems then, going back to the notion of goodbyes being a gift, this has always struck me. There's just the way human life works is there's certain times in life that naturally call for stepping back and marking things or enunciating things that wouldn't be enunciated at other times. It goes with the whole kind of seasonal aspect of life, that it's a divine gift, that seasons call you to kind of look again at certain ways, looking through a new angle now, well, now because it's spring, or now because it's summer, and whatever. That there are needs for goodbyes, or a fittingness of goodbyes fairly regularly in human life, in varying levels, that it's just you're saying it's maybe this isn't just even something that we're imposing. Oh, this is a nice opportunity to do this. Maybe that's even part of the design, that it makes
Hmm.
sense that at those times you remind yourself of the dispositions that should be with us all the
Hmm.
time. Something else that comes to mind there is also, if we are practicing the little goodbyes, we're ready for the big goodbyes.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that's a
big goodbyes are
really,
really, really important.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you and I are at the stage where we've said goodbye to people who are dying.
Hmm.
In each of us case, at least one parent. Um, and other such things. I mean, th what an important moment in life to be ready for, and I mean,
Mhm.
isn't it interesting? If we kinda have a habit of Irish goodbye, of not leaning into the smaller things, then we might find ourselves even hoping that we don't have to confront certain things, that those bigger goodbyes are a graced calling or opportunity to confront those things.
Mhm.
So once again, the home as the preparation ground for the bigger things in life. The number of times you and I have stood on our front patio and stood next to one another, waving as
Mhm.
somebody is driving off.
Mhm.
I mean, at this point, we're blessed to have been in the same home for a long time, and we have, I think, a a a habit, a custom there that we really love. We do that when we're sending off a student. We do that when we're sending off a child,
Mhm.
driving off to, you know, my daughter graduates from college and is moving to Arizona to become a teacher.
Mhm.
There was a goodbye right there. There was a waving, and the car goes
Mhm.
down the dusty road and goes around the corner.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, even just recognizing that the little goodbye in the morning of me driving off to go to the college to teach.
Mhm.
Again, all things in its place,
Yeah.
but there's something of that every time.
Mhm. It just speaking of that, you driving off to the college to work. We don't have little children running around in the house right now, but isn't it beautiful how the little child seems to want to say goodbye to daddy as he's leaving in a way that's very important to him. You kind of think, oh,
Yeah,
wow, this little child he's so little, he's so fixated. But maybe the little child is actually seeing something kind of unfiltered and more real.
yeah,
And then, of course, beautiful flip side of that is how the child
yeah,
welcomes
yeah,
daddy when he comes home, and the hiding and daddy find me, or
yeah, yeah.
it's such a, maybe actually thinking of both of those things together, maybe in every goodbye is the anticipation, desire, and longing for the hello that will come ultimately sometime. So it's never a goodbye to sever and cut off, but it's always a goodbye that treasures and cherishes.
Boy, I'm just really thinking now of being a bit melancholic of children hiding. It's been a little while, but no, that's the way our grandchildren. You come to the door and they run off and they hide, and you think, what in the, from the adult perspective, what in the world is the child doing?
Yeah.
But there's something so beautiful. Child wants to be found.
Yeah.
Imagine, how horrible it'd be if when they go off and hide, you turn around and leave. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a
Or
catastrophe,
don't look for them.
right? I
And it's
mean,
so interesting. It's really in relation to people they really, really love. They don't run it.
yeah,
It's not hiding. They don't hide for everybody.
no,
They hide for the person they really are excited to see.
yeah.
So,
Well, so we then just we have the apt apt, apology, praise, thanksgiving. I think we could add another, which would be kind of a prayer. The word goodbye, of course, comes from God be with ye.
mhm,
And so it likewise is a good time for kind of the prayer slash well wishing of you're going to do great. May God bless whatever comes next.
mhm,
So it's a time to kind of look forward in hope. Just kind of want to throw that in as a kind of, my prayer for you is, as you go
mhm.
forth, kind of thing. Again, that fits well with every little one. But then, all right, so practical steps that we be more aware of this throughout our day. It's interesting. So when you're retiring, obviously that's a big goodbye. If you're changing jobs, I try to be aware anytime I'm in a context where I'm going to be signing off. You know, how sometimes, and particularly children, he didn't even. I'm just trying to remember this from a movie. He didn't even say goodbye. Can't remember who it was. He didn't even say. I mean, this is something they'll notice. Like, well,
Mhm.
look, if you're leaving. at least you have to say goodbye. And so that we understand that there's something natural there that perhaps we have let ourselves get away from, that we should rediscover about kind of what's most important, being together, being in presence, while recognizing that we don't get to be in the presence of those that we love all the time. And we show how it's okay. We might be this might be a very hard goodbye, but we go through it with hope. Right? Again, the C.S. Lewis
Mhm.
point of, because ultimately this goodbye is always a promise.
Mhm.
It's a promise that it's not ultimate. But because it's not ultimate, that's not a reason not to lean into it and do it right. We're going to do it right for now, but looking forward with hope to what is going to come next. I really think
Mhm.
we can pack all that in to our disposition, to the
Mhm.
look in our eyes, to the feel in our hands, or the hug, just that
Mhm.
touching base.
I really like that the acronym APT gives me 3 particular things that I, who am not as skilled or practiced in saying goodbye, can try to remember and actually use as something that helps me connect, like a touching point. So I like that the 3 points of the APT. It gives me 3 very concrete things to work with. Another thing that seems like it's very important in saying goodbye is certainly bodily postures. So, for example, looking into one another's eyes
Mhm.
or bodily touch, a handshake, a hug. I liked how APT actually kind of drives certain of those bodily postures. Like if you are saying, I want to be recollected to say I'm sorry, you don't say I'm sorry with your back turned to someone. So it really helps you to remember, look at the person when you're saying goodbye. If you're offering praise, well, certainly you look at the person. And so I think, and even Thanksgiving kind of, so apology is sometimes a little bit difficult. It can inhibit the desire to touch physically because you feel bad that you've done something. But as soon as you start praising, that becomes this bridge between you. And Thanksgiving seems to be kind of an ultimate rejoicing, kind of a culmination of the praise is a binding together, which seems to really kind of naturally lead into the bodily contact of a handshake or a hug. And so I like the way those 3 principles of a goodbye actually support and encourage the bodily aspect of a goodbye that really helps it be meaningful.
That's great. I love that too. And I got just something I want to add to the list. It's not a bodily posture, but it is a bodily thing, and that is tears.
Mm,
And I think it's really, really important to to remember tears are a gift. But sometimes you'll actually hear someone say, "Well, I no, I just couldn't make that. I did an Irish goodbye because I knew I was going to cry."
mhm,
So just let me be harsh for a second, just for the sake of making a point, if I may.
mhm,
Of course, inside I'm thinking, Let me get this straight. You knew you're going to cry because this is such a big thing for you. It was going to make you cry, and because of that, rather than cry, we're gonna say no goodbye at all.
yeah, you decide to
I
not
I
mark
mean
the moment.
I mean,
Yeah.
just we just have to think this through and be logical. I'm not trying to be harsh because I understand,
Mhm.
because it's tempting for all of us.
But it's
I'm
not
not
thinking
saying I haven't
clearly.
done it myself, but let's just remind ourselves of, in fact, it's not even the answer here isn't just simply, well, we just have to be willing to endure the inconvenience of the tears, because it's important to say the goodbye. I go further and say, um, I know this from experience, that the tears very often are one of the most beautiful kind of solemnization,
Mhm.
bringing together, marking of the goodbye, a kind of catharsis, kind of cleansing through expression of the emotion. What a gift. I very often when I think of those, for instance, simple example, students who have cried when it was our last class together. Sometimes, I mean, that stays in my mind because it just makes clear in a way that would be hard to make clear in any other way, that this was really something important to the student, and
Mhm.
it touches them deeply. And
Mhm.
so in a similar way, that, sometimes just that moment touches one more than the other, but then maybe when tears start to be experienced had by the one, that then can move the other to tears because it makes you realize, oh my goodness, and yes, and here we are together,
Mhm.
and maybe you just hold one another, or whatever. I mean, according to the situation, it's a time even through tears to say certain things, that are often some of the most important things that need to be said, and they're watered, they're nourished by the tears.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Um, and being a non-crier, I wanna speak in defense of the
Mm,
non-criers. Not so much in defense of the non-criers, but I just wanna acknowledge there are many reasons why people can't cry. I do think that tears are a gift. St. Francis called it the gift of tears. And, um, and there are many reasons why some people can't enter into that. And while it may be a sad thing that they're not able to express the depth of their appreciation, sadness at passing, et cetera, by crying, it doesn't necessarily mean that the goodbye is not authentic
right,
and not real because that person cannot express it through tears. I think more the point that you're saying is tears should not be avoided
right.
because they are tears or
Or the
because they,
goodbye avoided because tears are gonna
yes, that
come.
also, or that when we say goodbye, we hold the tears back
Right, right,
for,
right,
for
right.
many
Mhm.
reasons, cultural reasons, embarrassment reasons. I mean, I often find that when tears do come, it actually opens up a place of vulnerability that makes you feel something
Yes,
even more.
yes.
So that could be a reason why people avoid tears. In any case, I think the main point is that we have to recognize that tears are a gift and that they are good, that when they're able to be authentically experienced, that it is good and not a weakness or um, something to be avoided.
No, indeed, and that and I'm glad, dear, that you spoke, quote, "in defense of the non-criers," because it is true. You are a non-crier, and I am a crier, and there's a number of, uh, stages in places to be in between us, and that itself is part of the great dance of life, of you probably, found my tears a bit odd, even if even wondering unnerving or wondering what was going on. And similarly, at times I've been a little befuddled that you don't have tears, but have certainly learned to look and be aware. It is no lack of a deep sensitivity and feeling on
Mhm.
your part. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because here I am as kind of more Mr. Tears, saying, "Oh, well, don't miss the good of tears," and I do want to say that because I do think it's true, but all we need to recognize that there will be differences between people on that.
Yeah. And that it's not necessarily a lack of tears is not necessarily an indication of a lack of
Yes, no,
perception
no,
or
exactly.
sensitivity or depth. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things here that have kind of heightened my sense of what I want to work on in some goodbyes that I have coming up, and just being in some larger ones, but then more in little things, and each according to our stage in life, and we can think about that not having the little children, but how we do this. How this of course goes along well with also how we greet people and good
Mhm.
mornings, which are a kind of wonderful other side, but
Mhm.
that's a topic for another day. So God grant us that in our goodbyes, we bring out some of that beautiful, even etymology there. God be with ye. I mean, may God be with us in trying to discern how to exercise the gift of goodbyes in view of the deeper truths of human nature, most of all, that we are called to the point where we won't have to say them anymore.
Mhm. Amen.
Thanks for the discussion, dear. Great to be with you all. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.